How's it going? My name is Jumpy. Today I'm going to start talking about the first 10 movies in the Saw franchise. There's too much for a single video, so I'm breaking this up into multiple parts. Before I started working on this project, I had already seen the first 9 films. That alone should already tell you how I feel about this series. I was in high school when the first movie was released. I first heard about it from a kid named Eric. My older brother was also a fan, and I borrowed the first 2 movies on DVD from him. The first one I got to see in a movie theater was Saw 3, and it became a yearly tradition for my brother and me to go until Saw 7's release in 2010. Those were some really fun experiences. I rewatched all of those on DVD, most multiple times, but I haven't seen any of the original 7 films in at least a decade. More recently, I watched both the 8th and 9th movies one time each at home. So I was looking forward to revisiting these movies and seeing how much I would enjoy them now, and also as a refresher for Saw 10. For this video, I'm going to completely spoil these films, but I'm going to do it in a specific way. For each of the movies in the series, there will only be spoilers for that movie and any previous entries. So for example, my Saw 6 discussion will include spoilers for Saw 1 through 6, but won't contain any plot spoilers for Saw 7 through 10. Right off the bat, before I get started, I do recommend this series if you haven't seen it before. My advice is pretty straightforward. It's to watch the first movie, and then if you like it and want more, keep watching the sequels until you stop enjoying them. Go do that, and then come back here to watch my video. Even though I'm going to walk through the plots of these movies, I think their twists are a lot of fun to discover on your own. Let's get to it. Saw was released in 2004 by Lionsgate. I had completely forgotten that the first movie uses a different studio logo than the one I'm more used to seeing on these films. The one they have on Saw 1 starts in space, and has a lion constellation, and then has some clouds. It's not spooky unless you're afraid of astronomy. We'll get to the other logo later on, don't worry. The movie was directed by James Wan, and written by Leigh Whannell, and both came up with the story. These two would later team up for Dead Silence, and they also started the Insidious series. Unlike some of my videos, Saw 1 wastes no time getting started, which is something I really like here. Right off the bat, a man wakes up in a bathtub filled with water, and he snags the plug, causing both the water and a key to go down the drain. He calls out for help, and there's another person there. The other man finds a switch and turns on the lights, revealing that the 2 kidnapped men are on opposite sides of a bathroom, each with one of their feet chained to a pipe. The character who woke up in the bathtub is a photographer named Adam, who's played by the film's writer Leigh Whannell. The one who turned on the lights is an oncologist named Dr. Lawrence Gordon, LG, who shares initials with Lionsgate. He's played by Cary Elwes from Black Christmas 2019, which is the best one. In the middle of the room is a body laying on the floor in a pool of blood, holding a gun in one hand and a tape recorder in the other. The men discover they both have a tape in their pockets, and Adam retrieves the tape recorder and plays them back. Lawrence has until 6 o'clock to kill Adam, which gives him about 7.5 hours. Otherwise, his wife and daughter will be killed. There are clues and items in the room, and something I really like throughout the movie is the characters figuring out the riddles. Like, Lawrence's tape ends with a whisper, which he has to rewind and listen to again to discern what's being said. It's a clue that leads them to finding a pair of saws in a toilet's tank. They try to use these saws to cut through the chains, which doesn't work. Gordon quickly realizes they're supposed to be used to cut off their own feet. He also determines that the person behind this entire ordeal is the Jigsaw Killer, who is a serial killer that tries to help people who don't appreciate their lives by putting them in a life or death situation in which they must make a choice to live. Lawrence is there because he's cheating on his wife with another woman. Adam watches other people live their lives instead of living his own. In this sense, he's similar to James Stewart's character in the movie Rear Window. As far as other comparisons, it goes without saying that Saw very clearly takes inspiration from the David Fincher film 7. Both movies feature a self-righteous killer who thinks they're targeting bad people. However, 7 puts a much greater emphasis on the detectives than Saw does. but the influence is definitely there when the Saw detectives visit their crime scenes. I'm going to point out a few other similarities when I get to them, but Saw is enough of its own thing, combining these influences and elements to stand on its own. The Jigsaw Killer has such a fucked up way of doing things, and this makes for a very interesting villain. 5 months before Lawrence and Adam in the bathroom, Detective Tapp, played by Danny Glover, and Detective Singh, played by Ken Leung, are investigating the murders for the city police department. I'm not sure where these movies take place, and it's not specified anywhere that I ever picked up on, so I started calling it Jigsaw City. The two detectives find Dr. Gordon's penlight at a murder scene, and they call him in for questioning. Gordon reluctantly gives his alibi, which is that he was having an affair. But the detectives still suspect him, so they have Gordon listen to the story of a woman named Amanda, played by Shawnee Smith. She survived one of Jigsaw's traps, and he tested her because she was a drug addict. She had a device on her head that Jigsaw referred to as a reverse bear trap in the videotape that Jigsaw plays for her. He also tells her that she needs to cut open the stomach of a dead man to get the key inside. She breaks free from the chair, which starts the timer on the reverse bear trap. She quickly finds the man and a knife. He's actually still alive, but was just drugged. He opens his eyes just before he's stabbed, and he couldn't move and barely felt it. This is absolutely haunting. There are Robert Bresson-style close-ups of Amanda's hands as she digs through and then holds up the stomach to retrieve the key. These are actually Leigh Whannell's hands in these shots. This sequence shows off some of the movie's occasionally frantic editing, camera movements, sped up footage, and slow motion. We could find these techniques elsewhere in the film, along with freeze frames that are made to look like crime scene photos. Despite being a little overblown at times, these are memorable and mostly used to good effect. Saw also has elements of another Fincher movie, Seven's immediate follow-up from 1997, and it's called The Game. Obviously it has a character who plays a game, but it's dangerous and has clues and keys. Early on in Saw, we also see a couple other unrelated traps to get an idea of what Jigsaw is up to. There's Paul, who's forced into a cage filled with barbed wire. And then there's another man who is covered in a flammable substance with only a candle to light up the dark room with the floor covered in broken glass and the walls covered in numbers. He's also been poisoned, and he needs to figure out which numbers make up the combination to the safe in the middle of the room that contains the antidote. Explaining it now is ridiculous, but it works in the movie. Neither of these people in those traps make it out alive. There's another detective character who shows up briefly named Carrie, played by Dina Meyer. She has a line about how Jigsaw always has to be nearby for his games, which is excellent foreshadowing. Maybe she'll show up in the next movie, I don't know. And there are some stylish transitions between the scenes, like when the camera pans down from a desk at the police station where Amanda is telling her story, into the ceiling of the bathroom. It's a simple edit, but I quite like it. There's another scene that cuts back to Tapp during Amanda's story, and then a car pulls up in front of him. It seems like the filmmakers used a green screen behind the car and layered it over the other scene. It's really smooth and it looks cool, but it also makes me laugh because it makes Danny Glover look fucking ginormous in the background compared to the size of the car. Maybe that was in his contract. Since he was the biggest name in the movie, he also had to be the biggest character physically. Glover is already 6'5" on his own, but I guess that was just not enough for him. I also need to mention that there's another really creepy flashback scene that takes place in Adam's apartment. He falls asleep in the darkroom and wakes up with the lights out. Hey, that's the second time that happened. Well, technically the first because it's a flashback, but it's the second one we see, whatever. The electricity is out and he walks around his apartment in the dark. He hears something and he uses his camera's flash to illuminate the rooms, which is a nod to the end of Rear Window. There's some nice suspense because he has to wait for the camera flash to recharge before he can use it again. Sitting in a chair is Billy the Puppet, a little doll that's a little clown-like, in a suit with black hair and a white face with red swirls on the cheeks. This puppet is also a little reminiscent of the wooden clown in David Fincher's The Game, which also ends up sitting in a chair. In Saw, Billy the puppet starts laughing, and Adam beats the puppet with a baseball bat. Then he opens a door and uses the camera flash as a person in a pig mask jumps out at him, which is a wonderful jump scare. Another great sequence is when detectives Tap and Sing discover the location of Jigsaw's lair by using clues from a videotape that Jigsaw made for Amanda's game. The detectives skip proper procedures and go straight to the building without a warrant. And this is where we get to what might be my favorite part of the movie. Inside they see a little diorama that Jigsaw made of the bathroom. It's got dolls, and it's made out of a cardboard box. It's absolutely adorable. They also find a man in a trap, and they hear someone else coming, so they hide. Jigsaw arrives, and the detectives tell him to freeze. So Jigsaw starts the unnamed man's trap. They ask Jigsaw where the key is, and he tells them, quote unquote, "It's in the box." That's a little too similar to the "What's in the Box" line from the David Fincher movie. Holy fuck! Saw really is just a ripoff of 7. I was wrong all along. Jigsaw then cuts Tap's throat and Sing chases after him after saving the other man. Sing shoots Jigsaw, who falls down. Sing approaches the body and trips a wire, which is connected to a few shotguns, and these fire and kill him. Jigsaw stands up and walks away. Tap survives and is kicked off the police force. This sequence certainly has a few similarities to the one in 7 where the movie's detectives find the killer's apartment, and then the killer returns when the cops are there, resulting in the detectives chasing the killer and one of the detectives getting injured. Something that surprised me on this rewatch is that Saw is funnier than I remembered. Adam has some good jokes, like the line, "This is the most fun I've had without lubricant." Also, when he accidentally checks the toilet bowl first instead of the tank. And the scene where he awkwardly pretends to die from a poisoned cigarette is hilarious. He does this because they're being watched by a camera that was behind a two-way mirror that he broke earlier. But then, he's shocked by an electrical current running through the chain, which gives away that he's still alive, ruining their plan. There's also another nod to 7, since both movies have a line about someone covering themselves in peanut butter. The acting in Saw is uneven at times, and a few line readings are not great. But it's good enough overall, paired with every other aspect of the film, that those lesser moments don't hurt the movie. The film leads you to believe that the Jigsaw killer is actually a man named Zepp, who's an orderly at the hospital where Dr. Gordon works. He's a fucking creep, and a great red herring. He breaks into Gordon's house, ties up his wife Allie and his daughter Diana, and monitors Gordon and Adam in the bathroom. I love the twist of Adam knowing who Gordon was all along. This is because Tap continued the investigation on his own after being let go, and hired Adam to take pictures of Gordon. Afterwards, Adam's mood changes very quickly and they argue. Much like 7, the final stretch of Saw 1 is fantastic and shocking. When the time runs out at 6 o'clock and Gordon still hasn't killed Adam, Zepp goes to kill Allie and Diana, and he calls Gordon on the cell phone that they found in the bathroom and makes Allie tell him the news. Allie fights back against Zepp, and Gordon hears the struggle and a gunshot. This also attracts the attention of former Detective Tap, who is watching Gordon's place from across the street, and he rushes over. Both Allie and Diana survive, but Zepp goes to kill Gordon, and Tap follows. The car chase here is amazing. Both Tap and Zepp are in cars in front of a black backdrop with some fog. The entire thing is shot from the front, and the camera moves around a little bit, cuts quickly, and zooms in on their faces and into the headlights. They didn't have the budget for anything more, and it's so endearing. I love this more than most car chases, and I doubt James Wan topped this in Furious 7, which I haven't seen. Back in the bathroom, the cell phone is ringing, which we later find out is Allie trying to call. Gordon can't reach it now and doesn't know what's happened to his family, so in desperation, he grabs a saw and cuts his foot off to free himself from the chain. While this is happening, Zepp fatally shoots the detective, which makes him tap out for good. When Gordon is free from the chain, he crawls over to the gun and shoots Adam. Zepp enters and sees everything. He walks over to Adam, but it turns out that Adam survived the gunshot. Adam beats Zepp to death with the toilet lid. After Gordon leaves to go get help, Adam looks for a key in Zepp's pockets, but instead finds a tape recorder. He plays the tape and discovers that Zepp wasn't the mastermind. He was just another player in the game. Zepp had been poisoned and needed to kidnap and possibly murder Gordon's family to get the antidote. This is where the biggest twist comes. The body in the middle of the room stands up and rips off the gunshot wound makeup from the side of his head. This man is John Kramer, who has the same initials as the Jigsaw Killer, and he's played by Tobin Bell. John is a cancer patient that had Gordon as his doctor, and Zepp as his orderly at the hospital. We got to see him very briefly in an earlier flashback. John tells Adam that the key to his chain is in the bathtub, but it went down the drain with all the bathtub's water at the start of the movie when he woke up. This suggests that the draining was a mistake, and Jigsaw intended for the key to still be there in the water, so Adam should have been free to go. Instead of looking for the key or saying anything, Adam wants revenge and grabs Zepp's gun and tries to shoot John. But John uses the remote to shock Adam through the chain again, stunning him long enough for John to walk away. Then he turns off the lights, says "game over," and slams the door shut, leaving Adam inside. Adam continues screaming over the start of the end credits, and it's bone-chilling. The music, the flashbacks, all of the information revealed, and the way everything comes together is so exciting and well executed. Because the movie series got so popular and the sequels used Tobin Bell in their marketing, it's harder to surprise someone seeing this movie for the first time with the Zepp red herring. Of course, that's not the movie's fault. It's pretty obvious that I love this one, and think it's a pretty great little film. It's got a few creepy and tense moments, but it's not scary. None of these movies really are. But it's a very compelling story, and despite being gross and gritty, the whole thing just has a charm to it. And I have a soft spot for the diorama, the transitions, the car chase, the occasionally uneven acting, and Adam's jokes. I was surprised by how much I still enjoyed this, and there's so much about it that I appreciate. I'm giving it an 8 out of 10. This series is off to a fantastic start. And now we get to the first sequel, Saw 2. This one was released theatrically one day before the 1-year anniversary of the original, and it was directed by Darren Lynn Bousman. He wrote the original script as a completely unrelated movie, and Lee Winnell came in and helped turn Bousman's screenplay into a Saw movie. Right away when the movie starts, it's good to see the alternate new Lionsgate logo. I say this like the movie isn't almost 20 years old at this point. It's got close-ups of rusty gear spinning, and then the camera backs out through a keyhole, revealing the outside of the Lionsgate. And then it opens up, and behind it is the word Lionsgate in front of some scary red clouds. This logo sets up the tone really well. The movie proper starts up, and we meet a police informant named Michael. He looks around the room in first-person POV, notices a mirror, and turns it towards himself. His right eye is bloodied, and he has a steel contraption resting on his shoulders that is filled with pointy spikes and looks like it could close on his head. He moves, which causes a videotape to start playing, and we see a familiar face, Billy the Puppet. Mike's probably thinking, "God damn, look at those Sega Dreamcast swirls on that puppet's cheeks." And this scares him quite a bit, because he prefers the PlayStation 2. Jigsaw compares Mike's torture device to a Venus flytrap, and he tells him, "I am going to give you a hint as to where I've hidden the key. It's right before your eyes." And there are x-rays on top of the TV that show a key shape right by his eye. Mike briefly assesses the situation and probably thinks to himself, the clues are key and eye. Key eye? Eye key. When he pieces it together, he pulls further forward and starts the timer. He approaches a toolbox and finds a scalpel inside. Despite the change in director, this scene continues using the visual and editing styles established in the first movie, which I enjoy. Mike can't go through with cutting out the key, and the timer runs out and the device slams shut on his head. He never even got to play the 2 Saw games that were on the PlayStation 3, which would have been his console of choice had he lived to see its release. Next, we're introduced to a detective. Dude's name is Eric Matthews, which is a great name for a couple reasons. 1, the kid who first told me about Saw was named Eric. And 2, the name Eric Matthews always makes me laugh because it's also the name of the main character's older brother on the TV show Boy Meets World. Additionally, there's another Eric Matthews character, a cop in the movie Miss Congeniality, which was released a couple years before Saw 2. I'm not sure if Miss Congeniality is referencing Boy Meets World or if Saw 2 is referencing either of the others, but it's funnier if they're not just coincidences. Anyway, the Saw 2 detective Eric Matthews, who's played by Donnie Wahlberg, needs to get his son Daniel out of trouble because he's been stealing things. The two of them have a strained relationship. Eric shares custody with Daniel's mother, with whom he's divorced. Carrie, one of the detectives who had a small part in the first movie, asks for her former partner Eric to come to Mike's crime scene. Here, the movie has my favorite transition, which is another carryover from the original movie's bag of tricks. Eric literally walks from one scene into the next at a different location, from his bedroom to the crime scene. The filmmakers did this by just building the sets together and sliding the wall that separates them. It turns out that Mike was Eric's informant. Eric's probably thinking, well, fuck, no more game nights with Mike. Maybe I should go to his apartment and grab his PS2 before anyone else tries to take it. And I should also get his copy of that Final Fantasy X sequel with the Keymon monkey that he's always talking about. When Eric starts to walk away, Carrie tells him, "Look closer, Detective Matthews." But that's not an original thought. She was just reading those words off the ceiling. Afterwards, back at the station, Carrie asks Eric to help with the case. He resists at first, but he later remembers the words Wilson Steel on Mike's trap. They get a SWAT team and go to the Wilson Steel factory, led by Sergeant Rigg, played by Lyric Bent. Next we get to one of the best scenes in the movie. Jigsaw is inside sitting at a table just eating some lunch and reading a book, and he hears them coming in. He puts the book down, pushes his bowl aside and wipes his lip. I don't know, it's just these little details that I find very humorous. He's not at all menacing here, he's just some guy doing the most mundane thing ever. The SWAT team breaks down the door without knocking first or announcing themselves. I mean, they should have said, "Open up, it's the police." And then Jigsaw could have gotten on the intercom and said, "But you didn't say pretty please." At that point, they would have just broken down the door out of spite. Once they're inside, and this is what really happens in the movie, not my joke, 3 team members break into a locked cage with some stairs inside. At the top, they get to see Billy the Puppet ride out on a tricycle, which is such a creepy image. Then the door closes, and the trap results in one getting a leg injury on the stairs, and the others getting electrocuted. But the main cops finally get to Jigsaw, and we get some nice set dressing with steel contraptions and mannequins. It's always a pleasure seeing his layers. They handcuff John and he tells them that they need to go check out something across the room. They oblige and find monitors showing 8 people in a house, including Eric's son Daniel. They're all exposed to a poisonous gas that will kill them within 2 hours, so they need to find antidotes that are hidden throughout the house. I'm not going to dance around this. I like this movie a lot. The setup is great, and it's paid off pretty well. We have 2 main things going on here. Jigsaw and Eric at the factory, and then the 8 people in the house. I love the scenes between John and Eric. Jigsaw was established as an interesting villain in the first one, but Tobin Bell really didn't get to do much. Here, he gets to shine, and it's very entertaining to watch. He fucks with Eric so much, and it's amazing, like taunting him about his son, and changing Daniel's voicemail greeting message because he knows Eric will try to call. John intentionally got caught just so he could bring Eric there and test him. We also get to find out more about John. After he got the news he was going to die of cancer, he attempted to kill himself by crashing his car, but he survived, and that's when he decides to start making his traps and playing his games. The media gave him the name Jigsaw because he cuts a jigsaw piece out of his dead victims that represents them not having the will to survive. It's great seeing him try to rationalize his horrible actions. Alright, I gotta say this. This current game of the people in the house is a complete train wreck from the start. It was just a bad idea, and this makes for an interesting part of the movie. We meet all our characters. There's Jonas, who tries to be level-headed and think things through. Then there's Xavier, who's incredibly selfish and wants to take action immediately and get out no matter what. Also, there's Addison, Abby, and Laura, as well as Daniel, of course. And who can forget about the other dude who doesn't get a name? Rumpelstiltskin rules apply, I guess. Lastly, and most surprisingly, Amanda from the first film is also there. Amanda finds a tape recorder that fills them in on the situation. One of the antidotes is in a safe in that room. There's also a key and a note that says not to use that key on that room's door. Xavier ignores this and tries to use it. The nameless dude looks through the peephole, which has a gun on the other side that goes off when the key is turned, and he gets shot in the eye. This causes him to stumble Stiltskin and fall over. He's dead. No point in the others trying to guess his name now. And it only gets worse from there. Eventually the door opens on its own, and the surviving members of the group start exploring the House of Games. Xavier breaks the front door with a baseball bat with spikes that he found, but there's a steel gate behind the door blocking them from getting out. They go to the basement and find Abby's trap, and his tape reveals that he kidnapped the others. He has to get inside a furnace, and he burns to death. Next is another room with Xavier's trap. He's supposed to find a key hidden in a pit of syringes. Instead of going in himself, he throws Amanda into it. The sequence is very hard to watch. It's drawn out, Amanda has needles sticking out of her arms, and it looks like it really hurts. She eventually finds the key and gives it to Xavier, but the timer runs out before he can use it. Daniel helps Amanda out of the pit, and there are a couple shots where he's pulling syringes out of her arms. The movie's special effects team made a fake arm specifically for these close-ups. I guess Leigh Whannell was busy that day and couldn't play her arm double. Throughout all of this, everyone gradually deteriorates from exposure to the poison, moving slower and becoming increasingly desperate. The movie keeps cutting back to the factory. We've learned multiple things, like Eric and Carrie had an affair in the past, and that Eric likes to use excessive force on suspects. Carrie suggests that they destroy John's work and research. I really like the use of vertical editing when Eric considers what to do next. This isn't the first time this technique has been used in the series, and it won't be the last, but it's my favorite utilization of it. Eric looks at John and tries so hard to keep it together on the outside. This is intercut with a representation of his inner, unsuppressed anger as he's shown grabbing and hitting the fence in front of him, ready to attack. And the movie rapidly cuts back and forth between these two states of what he's doing on the outside and what he's feeling inside. Then he starts ripping up all of John's papers. Jigsaw reveals that Eric planted evidence to put away the other 7 people in the house. Meanwhile, Xavier figures out the riddle that will get him the antidote from the safe. Each person has a number on the back of their neck, and they're in different colors and must be reordered Roy G. Biv style in accordance with the rainbow. He still has the bat with the spikes. Jonas shows up, and he has a good scene where he talks about his enemies coming after his family. He's easily the most likable character in the house. Right off the spike bat, Xavier starts a fight and then kills Jonas by hitting him in the back of the head with the bat. Addison's trap is rough. There's a glass tank with a syringe inside and 2 holes in the bottom. She gets both her hands caught in the holes because the coverings are made out of blades. Her off-camera screams are haunting. And Laura, the other woman, unceremoniously dies in a hallway from the poison. Xavier checks the back of their necks. At the factory, Eric beats the shit out of John. John says the game is over and that he'll show Eric where the house is if they go alone. They escape in an elevator, and this is where the movie really starts its finale. Much like the first film, it has many, many things that happen. The tech team finally get a trace on the video signal, so Rigg and his team head out to that location. In the car, John gives Eric directions and says it's the last house on the left, as a reference to the Wes Craven movie. I find it charming how obvious it is that someone likes the movie and just wanted to name drop it. That's something I would do. And that movie got remade a few years later in 2009. And I always want to attribute that to it getting mentioned in Saw 2, even if I know that's probably not true. Back at the house, Xavier chases after the only other survivors, Daniel and Amanda, to get their safe combination numbers and colors. Daniel and Amanda barricade themselves in the room with the safe, and Amanda sees there's a door on the floor under the safe, so they push it back. The door leads to some passageways, and they end up in the bathroom from the first movie. This is less plausible than my reason for The Last House on the Left getting remade, but I'm going with it. The bathroom is absolutely disgusting, even more so than it was before. Zepp and Adam's corpses are still hanging out and rotting in there. Another little thing I love is that they play back some dialogue from the first movie, and they manage to use not one, but two of Adam's jokes. He says, "My name is very fucking confused," and also the line about how he wishes he had checked the toilet's tank instead of the bowl first. Up above ground, Eric arrives and starts investigating the house, and some things don't add up. No, I'm not referring to the fact that neither Eric nor Sergeant Rigg show any concern about the poisonous gas, and nobody's wearing a gas mask. What I'm talking about is that Eric and Rigg never run into each other, and the safe is wide open, and there's a syringe on the floor next to Jonas's body. Also, when the SWAT team arrived at the house, they smashed open the front door, and there was no steel gate. Carrie stayed behind at the factory, and she can't see anyone on any of the monitors. Back in the bathroom, Xavier finally breaks inside. Amanda tells Xavier that she won't tell him the number on the back of his neck, so he spends a couple seconds looking for a mirror, finds one, sees it's gross and not reflective and that he can't wipe it off, and then he just cuts the skin off the back of his own neck. Daniel pretends to be dead, but he gets up and slices Xavier's throat with the same saw that Dr. Gordon used to cut off his foot in the first movie. This is honestly the best fan service ever. Next, Rigg finds monitors and VCRs that are playing back the footage, and he pauses it, which makes it pause on the monitors of the factory. This reveals that Rigg is at a different house than where Eric is, and that the game happened sometime in the past. Eric finally makes his way to the bathroom, and someone in a pig mask pops out of the bathtub and stabs him with a needle. When the timer runs out at the factory, a safe opens up and Daniel is inside, alive and with an oxygen mask on. Basically, all Eric had to do was sit and talk with John until the timer ran out, but he didn't, so he failed his test. Later, Eric wakes up in the bathroom with his foot chained to a pipe and a tape recorder next to him. This probably reminds Eric of the times he played Resident Evil 3 Nemesis with Mike, because that game has a puzzle in the hospital where you find a tape recorder and then use it. Poor Mike. Eric plays the tape and we hear Amanda's voice. She says that after she was first tested by Jigsaw, he became her father figure and mentor, and she's going to continue his legacy after he dies. Amanda walks up, and this time she gets to deliver the game over line, and slams the door like John did at the end of the first film. Before the credits start, the movie cuts back to Jigsaw in Eric's car. He's beaten and bloody, but he's still alive and gives a small smile. The end credits provide the movie's final twist. It's that the Rumpelstiltskin man in the house who looked through the peephole and got shot is actually named Gus. Saw 2 isn't quite on the same level as the first film, but I was on board the entire time. Even though it's not the most realistic movie, I think it's very clever for what it does, and I love the clues that it gives and the twists it takes. It was a lot of fun to rewatch, and I enjoyed it more now than I ever did in the past. Like the first one, I'm giving it an 8 out of 10. And speaking of Saw movies, I also watched Saw 3. Like the previous movie, this one was directed by Darren Lynn Bousman. However, this time around, the screenplay was written solely by Lee Winnell from a story he and James Wan came up with. Before making this video, I always cited Saw 3 as my favorite in the series, so I was looking forward to revisiting this one the most. The movie begins with Detective Matthews still chained up in the bathroom. He retrieves an empty gun, a flashlight, and a saw that were on the ground near him. He tries to cut through the chain with the saw. That never worked before, and it doesn't work now. He notices Dr. Gordon's severed foot, and he immediately prepares to do the same to himself. but he can't go through with it. Then he sees Adam's corpse and doesn't want to end up like that, so he grabs the toilet lid and smashes his foot, breaking it so that he can slide it out of the chain. That hasn't been tried before, and it does work now. It's an effective opening scene that's very gruesome, and lets you know what you're in for with this film, which is more graphic than the entries in the series that came before it. After the title card, some police cut through a door at a potential crime scene. Of special note here is that they're wearing gas masks, and I'm sure the entire department had to go through some mandatory training on wearing them after the last movie when all those people entered a house they believed was filled with poisonous gas. Of course, the first one of the cops that takes off their mask in Saw 3 is Sergeant SWAT Commander Rigg. He probably still hasn't lived that down by this point in the story. It's so embarrassing for him. Rigg sees an exploded body, and he calls in Carrie, who's been very worried about Eric. Here, we meet Detective Mark Hoffman for the first time. I love this guy. He's my main Hoffman. He tells Carrie the corpse they found isn't Eric, and explains what went down. A man named Troy was tested. He had several chains in his body and had to pull them all out and leave. He couldn't do that fast enough, and the timer ran out. Right off the blast, a bomb detonated and Troy got blown up. Carrie notices that there was no way Troy could have escaped because the door was welded shut. After that, we get one of my favorite scenes in the movie. In Carrie's bedroom, she watches the videotape that Jigsaw made for Troy, when suddenly her TV shows grainy footage of something else. She gets up, waves her hand, and realizes the TV is showing live footage of her bedroom from a camera inside her closet. Someone breaking into your house to set this up is a terrifying idea. She grabs a gun from her gun drawer and shoots the closet door 4 times and approaches. This part's very well done. The movie cuts between normal cinematic shots of Carrie and close-ups of the TV showing the grainy footage. But it stays on a shot showing the TV on the left side of the frame and Carrie's back on the right side. When she gets to the closet, the shot zooms in on the TV, which is now taking up most of the frame. Someone wearing a pig mask sneaks up behind Carrie and grabs her. We mainly see this on the TV, but there's a small sliver on the right side of the frame where we see it happening from behind. She wakes up in a trap and does everything she needs to do. She grabs a key from a jar filled with acid and then uses it to unlock the device that's piercing her ribs. But she can't get free. Someone that Carrie recognizes walks up to her, but the audience can't see who it is. Carrie is then killed by the trap. Next we meet a doctor named Lynn. She's in an apartment with Chris. They both look miserable, and they're not talking about whatever the problem is. She has to go to work, and he calls out her name when she's at the door. She asks what he wants, and he says, a divorce. At the hospital, we see that Lynn is very distracted, but also really good at her job, and is capable of acting quickly and adapting to a situation when she saves a kid's life. It's a nice setup for later. She gets kidnapped in a locker room, and wakes up tied to a wheelchair in another one of Jigsaw's layers. I still love seeing these places, and all the traps they're working on. Amanda wheels Lynn over to John, who's bedridden and very close to death. We find out that they have kidnapped another person, a man who needs to complete not one, but multiple tests. Lynn needs to keep John alive until this other man finishes everything. Amanda puts a collar around Lynn's neck, which will automatically detonate if John's heart rate hits 0 or if Lynn tries to escape and moves too far away. The man they kidnapped is Jeff. The reason Jigsaw put him here is that 3 years ago, Jeff's 8-year-old son Dylan was killed by a drunk driver, and his tests are to see if he can learn forgiveness. He has 2 hours to finish them all. He probably had plans that night, like making tuna casserole for dinner. Jeff is filled with anger and hatred. There's a great flashback here when he's drinking in Dylan's room. He has a gun, and he's contemplating murdering the drunk driver. We also see that he has suicidal thoughts through vertical editing. He notices that one of Dylan's toys is missing, and he storms into his daughter's room asking where it is, and then he takes back the stuffed pig. When he returns to Dylan's room, his daughter comes over to apologize, and he tells her that he loves her, and recognizes that he shouldn't be acting this way. And he wonders how his wife would react if she could see this. After his daughter leaves, we see that there's another person in a pig mask in the room. I like this flashback and the general handling of Jeff's character as a grieving parent who never had closure and is after revenge. And I'm just going to talk about Jeff's test here instead of going through the movie chronologically and jumping back and forth between him and whatever the hell Jigsaw, Amanda, and Lynn are up to. His first test is to forgive the only witness to the accident, a woman who did nothing to help put away the drunk driver. This is such a simple trap. She's chained naked in a freezer, and cold water sprays on her. This trap scares me because I don't like being cold in general, and I've run out of hot water in the shower before. Not to mention the lack of privacy with not having any clothes on. I don't like that either. It makes the whole scene more uncomfortable. Jeff starts criticizing her in action until her pleas and suffering convince him to go after the key that's behind some pipes. But he's too late to save her by that point, and she freezes. There's a pretty good jump scare when she's covered in ice and Jeff pokes her face, and the ice cracks. All Jeff can do now is move on. In the hall, he sees Billy the puppet on the floor next to a crashed tricycle. This is done to remind Jeff of his son, and it's there to remind me of the wooden clown in the David Fincher movie The Game. It's laid out on the ground to look like that film's main character's father who jumped to his death. Next up is the judge who sentenced the drunk driver to only 6 months. He's trapped inside a vat with a collar around his neck. Nasty dead pigs covered in maggots are dropped into a machine and shredded, and this is drained into the vat, which will eventually drown the judge. Jeff again says his piece before trying to save the judge. This time around, he needs to burn all of his son's possessions, including the stuffed pig from earlier, in order to obtain a key. This is difficult for him, but he does it. To recap, Jeff burns a pig to get a key to save a judge from drowning in pigs. This movie is amazing. The next part for Jeff is that he gets the chance to see Timothy, the man who killed his son. He's in a torture device that's called the rack that will twist all 4 of his limbs and his head. The key to free Timothy is connected to a shotgun trigger. Nothing's twisting his arm, so Jeff stands and thinks about if he wants to just let it happen before he changes his mind and approaches the key. The sounds, Timothy's screams, the close-up of the leg bone snapping, this is very hard to watch and it's the worst part of violence in the movie. Jeff carefully grabs the key, but the gun fires and shoots the judge in the face. Unfortunately, Jeff cannot figure out where to use the key, and Timothy dies as Jeff forgives him for his mistake. Back to Jigsaw, Amanda, and Lynn. Once again, Tobin Bell is a pleasure to watch. He's given some good lines and gets some great moments. Even though he's on the verge of death, he can still be intense and frightening. But what I really love is that Shawnee Smith is given more to do here, much like Jigsaw in the second movie. We get to see who she became. She threatens and fucks with Lynn, and it's scary. She's not even in the rack trap, but it always feels like she's going to snap and attack Lynn. There's a scene where Lynn is looking around trying to figure out a way to escape, and she gets close to the reverse bear trap on a table, and it goes off and falls to the floor. Amanda pops up and taunts Lynn before grabbing the trap up off the floor. Her picking the trap off the ground is a nice visual contrast to the first movie when she passed her test and removed the reverse bear trap and threw it to the ground. She's no longer running away from the traps, but embracing them and even making her own. I need to stress how much I love the flashbacks throughout this movie. They're well integrated into the story and provide more information about Amanda and John's relationship. In the present, John has a seizure and Lynn needs to perform an operation to relieve the pressure on his brain. And this surgery scene is awesome. One of the finest in cinematic history. I say that jokingly, and I am exaggerating, but I do think it's a really well done and suspenseful sequence. Lynn cuts out a piece of John's skull. She does this very crudely with a scalpel, pliers, a power drill, and a tiny saw. We see all of this in detail and it's very gross. The movie cuts back multiple times to close-ups of his heart rate monitor, and Lynn is understandably very stressed because she will die if she messes up. When she believes she's done with the surgery, John's numbers start to go down. John has a memory of a romantic date in a park with a woman that he loved. Lynn puts an oxygen mask on John's face, and he says, "I love you." and grabs Lynn's arm while he's still thinking about the other woman. Amanda is completely shocked by this and gets jealous. She already hates Lynn, and this does nothing to help that. But John's heart rate is now back to normal. In other flashbacks, we find out Amanda was in the pig mask in Adam's apartment, and we see them make the final preparations before the bathroom test. One interesting detail is that Amanda just throws Adam's key on his chest. The first movie began with a key going down the drain, and it ends with Jigsaw telling Adam that the key is in the bathtub. So this was definitely Amanda's fault, and the key was supposed to still be there. In another flashback, Amanda returns to the bathroom and kills Adam by suffocating him. In the present, Amanda opens an envelope that has her name on it. She reads the letter inside, and whatever it says makes her cry. She tries to compose herself. Meanwhile, John talks to Lynn about her family and mentions an affair. And there's also a brief shot where he dumps candle wax on a cassette tape. When Amanda returns and tells them that Jeff has finished the third test, John declares that Lynn has passed her own test and can leave. He asks Amanda to take off Lynn's collar, but Amanda refuses because Jeff isn't completely out yet. John urges her to reconsider because Lynn is important to Amanda and controls her fate. But Amanda keeps saying no, pulls out her gun, and points it at Lynn. John asks Amanda how she felt about other people who were tested and lived, including Eric Matthews. Here, we finally get to see what happened after the scene at the start of the movie. Eric encountered Amanda in the halls, and they got into an intense fight. Amanda admits to John that she's a murderer, but John says that she only left Eric to die and that he cleaned up after her, and that he forgave her for it. He continues telling her that Lynn is important and that her success or failure affects them all. Amanda says something amazing, that the tests don't work, she hasn't changed after hers, and she wasn't fixed. Shawnee Smith's acting here is really good. The movie keeps cutting back to Jeff seeking his way out. During his entire series of tests, he's found boxes that contain a bullet and the thing that holds the bullets. Now he finds another box that contains a gun, along with a note that simply reads, "Last chance." As soon as we see the note, the movie cuts to John saying, "This is your last chance, Amanda." I like it. It connects the two stories that are soon going to collide, and it always makes me laugh. Jeff makes his way to John, Amanda, and Lynn, and he calls out Lynn's name. Lynn turns towards Jeff, and Amanda shoots Lynn in the back, causing her to fall forward into Jeff's arms. John tells Amanda that she just destroyed 4 lives by shooting Lynn, who's Jeff's wife. John kept that important detail from Amanda. But it's sweet. John is just a romantic relationship coach who is trying to save Jeff and Lynn's marriage the whole time. Jeff retaliates by shooting Amanda in the neck. When she's dying, John tells Amanda that the whole thing was her test, not Lynn's, and that it was Amanda who needed to keep Lynn alive the entire time. He wanted Amanda to continue his legacy after he died, but she had been making traps unwinnable, including Troy's and Carrie's. But John gave Amanda a final opportunity, and she failed. So yes, Lynn was cheating on Jeff with Chris, and Chris wanted Lynn to get divorced from Jeff. I'll admit the wording that he tells Lynn he wants a divorce is clunky. While this is certainly true factually that Chris wants a divorce, he realistically would have phrased it differently, like, "I want you to get divorced from your husband," or something. Jeff comforts his wife, and Amanda finally dies. Then Jeff points the gun at John. John tells him that he should have learned that vengeance solves nothing, and that he needs to think about his daughter. John assures Jeff that he can get an ambulance and save Lynn. He gives Jeff one last test, if he will kill John or forgive him. Of course, Jeff grabs a circular saw and cuts John's throat with it. As blood is spurting from his throat, John whips out a tape recorder and the door to the room closes automatically and locks. The tape reveals that Jeff failed his final test of forgiving John, and that John is the only one who knows where Jeff's daughter is being kept and that she will run out of air and die. When the tape finishes, John flatlines. We hear an explosion off screen and then see a close-up of the gory aftermath of Lynn's collar detonating. Not that the other movies didn't already have dark endings, but this one is so fucking bleak. Jeff is locked in a room with his wife's body and the corpses of 2 other people that made this happen. And knowing that he's not going to be able to get his tuna casserole. and that his daughter is out there locked up somewhere. The first 3 movies in this series have pretty much the same ending. Someone ends up locked in a room with at least one corpse. They're all awful outcomes, but Saw 3's is easily the one that affected me the most. I love this movie. Even after how much I enjoyed the first 2, this one is still my favorite. Jeff going through all of his tests and his forgiveness storyline, everything with Lynn, the flashbacks, getting to see who Amanda has become and exploring the subject of how these tests don't actually work, every twist at the end, this is all great. It's still ridiculous and convoluted in the best possible way, because it's so fun to watch. Of course, not everything is perfect, and you need to suspend your disbelief at times. But I'm giving it an 8 out of 10. I swear this isn't going to be the case with every entry in this series. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video where I discuss the next 2 movies in the series. Take care.